Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm excited to bring back this platform and discussions with people about recovery, discovery, uncovery. This is a takeoff from our radio show, Radio Rehab, which we ran for 10 years and met so many interesting people and learned how they found meaning and health and happiness in their life. So I'm glad now with these new platforms of Zoom and all the different ways we can virtually connect with people. I'm so proud and excited that for our first launch again to have my brother, Dr. Jeffrey Seif. He and I have both been on a path of looking for ways to make the world a better place. In our Jewish religion, it's called Tikkun Olam. And I think we have both had a passion for that from childhood of exploring the world with curiosity and imagination. My brother and I both have survived the Great Depression. It was our mothers. We didn't know anything about post-traumatic stress disorder back then. We just knew that our house was very sad and that there wasn't a lot of discussion about what was going on. Once we got older, we heard a little bit about my mother's leaving Germany with just the clothes on her back, not knowing the English language, coming to America, freed from the burden of the Nazis. But my brother has said it beautifully, and he'll talk about this too. She got out of Germany, but Germany never got out of her. Well, in my field now, and my brother's too, we're hearing a lot about trauma. And we hear a lot now since the Vietnam War about post-traumatic stress disorder. We're at a suicide rate we've never seen before, people dying by suicide, overdoses. And my brother and I have joined, we've always talked about how we would decipher the world. So I am proud for this first session to bring back a platform to you all of discussions and to kick it off with my brother who has gone to the streets. He's been all around the world. His wife and he now are on another new horizon of taking the message of a higher power, the Bible, history to people, just like we try to do in our recovery programs. So I'd love to introduce my brother, Dr. Jeffrey Seif. Let him tell you a little about him and a little about his platform and experiences in working with people. I love you, my baby brother.
It's such a thrill to be with you, honestly. And
you're right. It's the first time you've ever said that.
No, it is. But you're right. There is sadness in homes, and suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And it saddens me that people are depressed, repressed, suppressed, oppressed, and just really doesn't have to be that way. It's a lot of it's our imagination. The way that we respond to circumstances, and we just get caught up and can't get out. And I've always appreciated you wanting to help people get free. You know, I've done it my own way. 2 careers, law enforcement. I'm a graduate of the police academy. I just retired out of a police career, 23 years, and I'm in the process of retiring out. I turned in my police uniforms, but I currently still, through years end, serve as the director of a few police academies in the North Texas area. So, but I already tendered my resignation. I was kind of gliding out through the end of the year.
Congratulations.
Thank you. You know, I'm going to be 68 in November, and, you know, we're just getting a little bit older, and I wanted to build the rest of my life closer to other aspects of my life. But I am a criminologist, and I took a degree. I graduated the police academy. I also took a master's degree from Cambridge University in England, and I'm a PhD candidate still. I also have another side, a divinity vocation. I've been a professor, a theological professor, and I'm still active in that as an adjunct. But, you know, whether it's policing, pastoral work, or whatever, it's all about helping people like you. We serve in different branches, the armed forces. At the end of the day, we're trying to lend an arm and lend a hand to distressed humanity, and I'm glad to be able to reflect a little with you in this program.
Yeah, I think what you do, what I do, what we've seen so many others do is just in different neighborhoods, but the same message. Of course, mine has gone through the recovery cycle from an addictive disorder. What got you started in wanting to make the world a better place, Saifi? I know in our homeland of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, where we were raised, we were both in a hurry to get out of the house because the house was so sad.
What
But
what prompted me to want to make the world a better place is that, through religion, I accepted uh, Jesus, Yeshua in Hebrew, and that made me a better place, better space between the years. And when I ask myself the question, what do I want to do with this thing called a life? In as much as that was transformative for me personally, I wanted to build a life close to my core, and I recognized that really is authentically who I am. So I went in pursuit of that. And for that, I did Bible college and seminary, and I just went on that track. And but then I observed as well as I was in my ministerial vocation that I was a chaplain for the police, and I kind of just got um, attracted to that venue as well. So for me, I always just kind of followed the heart, the things that I got into in life. I always thought that if we lived a life that was in proximity to our base nature, our heart, our impulse, then our chances of being successful are greater than if we just did a job. So for me, it's been an extension of my heart in so many ways.
and you have written what, 20 books, you've taught at you've taught at every level, and then the police academy. So do you think that your heart's main passion is teaching?
Yes, for me, with an open Bible, principally, maybe you a big book or the 12 steps.
Right, right.
I think we need something bigger than ourselves to work from.
Yes.
And a lot of problems that people have in life is they have nothing but themselves and worn out old ideas that haven't served them well for the last 40 years. Why do they think they're going to serve them well the next 40 hours? People need new ways of thinking to kind of transcend these hardwired thought processes. And I know in the addiction world, I've heard it from you, stinking thinking, but people need new ideas. They need to transcend all that and find some other space. And for me, an open Bible is always very, very important because there's so much.
That's a very old idea, the Bible. I mean, when you talk about new ideas, just like our big book was written in the 30s, now we've had to change a lot of the ways because of the research we've had on the brain and what chemicals do to the brain. We've had to really find other pathways to reach more people without big book thumping them, so to speak. How do you answer to that being such an old map but it is a civilized behavioral
But
map.
even that old map, now I have no expertise to speak about the big book per se, but that big book derives principles from even bigger, the Bible. You want to talk about something that's dated.
Yes, yes.
You look at the literature, it goes back thousands of years, and there's principles there that are adjudged to be divinely inspired and timeless. And it is true that we need to keep current. I mean, but at the end of the day, the core values of the importance of turning away from, the word repent in Hebrew, teshuva, means to change your direction.
Yes.
The Greek metanoia means to change your mind, new ways of thinking, and developing, doing that in community with others.
Yes.
Which is so very biblical. I mean, there's new studies on neuroscience, and I'm into it. By the way, this year, 2023, my energies as a PhD student at Cambridge has been in neuroscience.
Yeah, I love it.
We could talk about that.
Yes.
But at the end of the day, there's instead of discovering something new, I've been about helping people discover something that's old.
Oh, I like that. Yes. Well, you mentioned the principles in the Bible. So it isn't so much the stories, like the stories in our big book are all about alcoholics that had to get to a place of desperation, really. The first 100 members of AA in the 30s were so desperate. Now we're not seeing that kind of desperation. So we've had to kind of find new ways to carry the message, but to make it about the principles. So is that what you do with theology now? Focus on the principles, but also the stories?
No, I think that's incorrect. I think everything's in the stories. If you look in the Newer Testament, Jesus was a storyteller. he used parables. If you look at rabbinic teaching, it's always been storytelling.
Okay.
I think stories are extremely powerful
Yes.
than lecturing in principles. I don't know whether it's that the stories are just getting old, or those of you that have been in AA have heard them so many times, they're old to you. They may be fresh to someone who's heard them for the first time, or it may be we need to come up with a new inventory of stories. But I
Well,
think
we do stories in AA. People give, it's called giving their lead, and we are very much storytellers in our groups.
okay, there you go. Yeah, so
And
I
I
don't.
guess you do too. You tell the stories of the people that are in the Bible.
I
And
just think the great communicators are storytellers, and they paint on the mind.
yes,
They leave a picture there. If you look at uh, even speaking of neuroscience, which you had mentioned earlier, visuals are 60,000 times more potent than words. If you've ever heard a good joke, you and I will banter around on the phone. You'll tell a joke. It's the funniest thing I heard in my life. I'll forget it 50 seconds later.
sure.
That we just don't retain word stock as much. But
Yes.
visual image is much more potent because it's much more sensual. You have not only the benefit
there's
of
a connection.
words here, but there's sensory stuff. You pick up tonal inflections with the modulation of voice. There's facial expressions. But visuals, and a good story is a visual, and the power of that just it's hard to overstate it to my way of thinking.
Well, our rabbi came from the Cape, and he uses music a lot. He did 60s music in the Shabbat and
Yeah.
made songs from John Lennon out of, the Shabbat songs. So I think through music, he is a storyteller. And
And you probably remember, when was the last time you recalled a sermon from a rabbi? Just conversationally, the fact that he used that modality, it's more front and center in your cerebral cortex, ready to be called. And probably when you mentioned it to me, you relived it in a certain extent, but
sure,
you felt it when you said it.
sure.
The power of using various modalities. But I don't want to sound lecturing. We're here to
You're
talk.
not, you're not. It's all very interesting. So let me ask you this. Now, in the recovery world, there's been a lot of different pathways for people to get well mentally, and if they have a substance use disorder. In the theological world, do pastors try to stay up with current times and relate the cultures of the day? Why are we losing the power of prayer in community to the power of prayer in solo Zoom space? We're losing members here in every synagogue and church. Even I mean the Buddhists have stayed pretty popular, I think. But why do you think there's been a drop?
Well, Orthodox Judaism has seen a growth spur, very
Right,
conservative, very traditional, very
yes,
authoritarian.
back to that, yeah,
And it's true as well that within the Christian world, the more conservative arm pulsates
huh.
more so. It's the liberal denominations where, the Bible isn't the word of God, it's words about God. And you can find that in Reconstructionist Judaism, Reform Judaism, and to a certain extent in conservative Judaism, where it doesn't have, we're not beginning with an authoritative text to draw from, then it's just ideas. And in the church world, your mainline denominations are just kind of falling off the grid. Your Methodist, your Episcopal, your Lutherans. It's
Why do you think that
because
is?
it's not tethered to a conservative base. I'm a Bible professor, and I really take seriously biblical literature, and believe that others should too, because therein it's very explicit, it's very definitive. Granted, it needs to be interpreted, and we can wrestle with how to interpret it, but it's an authoritative source. And it seems to me that the more you drift away from that, um,
That, yeah, okay, there's a need to come back to some basic absolutes. But what do you think about the reality that up until the 1950s, alcoholism was considered a sin? You were a drunkard, you were immoral, and your drunkenness was a choice till the 1950s, when the American Medical Association determined that alcoholism is a health-related issue.
Well, even
Why?
categorizing mental health issues is 100 or so years old. It began with Charcot, lectures in hysteria in France.
Right.
You know, in terms of mapping out the mind and variant diagnoses, it's relatively new anyway, you know. So if we're talking about the 1950s, in 1900s, people weren't even thinking in those terms. Psychology was an inchoate field. My understanding is people observed between the wars. You know, there was a tough World War One. Afterwards, people were swinging and blinging, and you know, alcohol and everything, and it was all
Bootleggers, yeah, the mafia. Oh, yeah.
and then it was legalized, and America's just dealing with it afresh. If you go back to biblical literature, there's aspersions cast on alcoholism in the Hebrew Bible. It's very descriptive in the book of Proverbs, warning against individuals being inebriated and losing touch with the real world.
Like Noah.
And Noah is very, Noah, you know, got drunk as a skunk. What was it in Genesis chapter 8? You know, so certainly the Bible warns against it.
But what about people that can't help it once they start drinking? It triggers a compulsion in their brain and an obsession. Would
Well,
that be a sin?
well, sin, the word sin in chet in Hebrew, it means to miss the mark. You know, if you're an archer and you're aiming at a target, you're aiming at the bullseye, but the arrow goes astray.
I
And
thought it meant hell.
no, it's sin. It comes from a word chet. It comes from a word meaning diverge, to go astray. And
Okay.
I think it's fair to say that you know, for someone to have a beer after work on a hot day or a glass of wine
That'll
is,
never hurt anybody. Yeah,
but
no.
for individuals that just can't turn off the engine,
Right.
it just leads to all destructive stuff. I mean, it's certainly, that's missing the mark. That's veering off course, and it doesn't take a theologian or a drug counselor to give voice to that. Just talk to the family members that have to live proximate to someone who's affected by those
Oh
things.
my God, they get sick too. The addict breaks their leg and the family wears the cast.
Yeah, so you know, it's
But why is it then that a lot of in the religious world, and forgive me if I'm asking questions that are trite, why is it still, why are pastors, rabbis, ministers, priests still not referring people to a health care professional if it's a health related issue like depression, anxiety,
I think that's
alcohol?
overly simplistic, Lisa. When I went to seminary, you know, it was, um, you know, it was very clear. I mean, it was axiomatic. You know, if you go to a minister for counseling, if you talk 6 times to someone and it can't make a difference, you refer to someone. Not everyone needs to see a shrink or an AA counselor.
No, I know, yeah,
But the point is, it's the mark of a professional in any venue that, you know, you can go to an MD, but if it's a specialized problem, you refer to someone who specializes in that. Now, it's my understanding in the ministerial world, that's the way the game is played, that you refer. In fact, all the different Bible colleges and seminaries, they have graduate programs in counseling. On the one hand, it has the bevy of courses someone would take to be a counselor, in addition to the biblical stuff. So that way, when they graduate, they can become a licensed professional counselor, hang up a shingle. And granted, they're drawing from more of a religious base than someone who hasn't been exposed to that. But I think it's overly simplistic to say, why don't they do that?
yeah, I don't mean to overgeneralize, but
Yeah,
I hear that a lot with people that come in later stage alcoholism, that early on they did go to pastors. And I think it's cultural too. It
but I
depends
hear people
culturally.
complaining about caregivers anyways. People
True,
complain about their doctor. Oh, this doctor was no good. I went to this doctor.
true,
This drug counseling problem was no good. Just because they're casting aspersions on things of the past,
true.
those people in the past aren't here to defend themselves. But in any case, it's my understanding that one a characteristic of a professional in any vocation is the willingness to give a referral. And that if you have a few conversations with people and you're not getting what you want, then you want to refer.
And we do that in the 12-step programs too, because we are not experts on outside issues, you
Yeah.
know. So in our 35, 40 years of deciphering the world, I love that you gave me that, deciphering our world with our name in it. What would you say are some of the maybe top 2 or 3 things, perspectives that you have really witnessed and observed in your 35, 40 years about the world we live in today?
That's a real broad question.
From your personal perspective.
Well, as I make my journey from the womb to the tomb, and I know I'm closer to the tomb at 68 than I am the womb. Now,
We're both 68 right now, you know.
as I make my crossing, I'm aware of how precarious life is, how disingenuous people can be, how when I say precarious, a lot of people are living just a hair's breadth away from anxiety, no, from
Yes.
panic, sheer panic.
Yes.
You know, that
Yes.
there's a lot of distress,
Yes.
and that, you know, for me, you know, as I make my journey, I because I've wanted to build a life that's proximate to my heart. I think that's the secret to success in life, because there's no contradiction to who I am and what I'm doing and how I'm living. I think that's really important. You know, I told my boys, if you can find work that you love and a woman that you love, that's 95% of life right there.
That's so true.
A lot of people are just trapped. They get into a relationship out of desperation. You know, they marry for an ideal. They think they got a raw deal. They go searching for a new deal. They're not happy in their relationships. They're not happy in their work, which is so much where people get identity from. You know, I think it's very important. At least for me, I found that live true to the self, and you're going to be further
You know
along.
what, Saifi? I have to say, you always have. You've not compromised or bent in your life. Where me, I've been twisted around like a pretzel and go with the wind half the time just to please people. You have stuck to your ideals. And once I got into psychology, of course, you know, Freud was the big one. And Freud, I want to ask you what you think about this too. He believed humanity's main drives were pleasure. And I have to say, probably the first 30 to 40 years of my life, pleasure was a main drive of mine. Buying, school, career, relationships, that was a major drive. And Freud believed that that's what motivated people, the pleasure drive. Then Adler came. And Adler and some of the others, Albert Ellis, turned it around and said, no, 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 Freud, that's not the main drive. Power is the main drive. So then there was a whole generation of people that thought, well, I've got to get to the top. I've got to be a CFO, a CEO, a manager, whatever, because having that power and that influence will keep you motivated. But Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning, who survived the Holocaust and wrote his book after seeing the conditions of the Holocaust, he said, no, Adler, no, Freud. Man's main drive is his search for meaning. And that if man can find meaning, then man will be content. And I think you and I have found such meaning in our careers and our relationships. But when I look at my baby brother, one thing I would always say is you've never compromised that drive to follow the meaning of your heart. Sure, we get caught up in power and pleasure. We're human. But I think at the end of the day, you were always willing to fall on your sword if it had meaning to you. And I so admire that. And I know our parents are watching now and so proud of who you have become and who I've become. Would you mind saying a little about what your next phase now? You and Barry, your wife, are joining. You're going to be like international now. So
No, let me comment on the point. I think
meaning.
I think Frankl is closer to the truth than Adler and Freud.
I do too.
You know, of course, Freud, you know, in terms of pleasure, I mean, he can say that he was involved in upper crust Viennese society. It's very elitist.
That's true.
You know, and those people have time for the pursuits of pleasure, and they have money. The average person in the workaday world I mean, it's true they're trying to increase their pleasure and decrease their pain, but they have Spartan few resources to expend against pleasure because so much of life's energy goes to just staying one step away from the bill collector.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like an elitist kind of, the pleasure and power. I mean, who has access to power? But I think the existential issue of finding a meaningful and purposeful life, that's where there's intrinsic value. I think that the search for that, and it's the lack thereof that
You
is
think it's part of aging, or do you think that's something you can start teaching now? I try to with people I work with, what the meaning in their life is. And some it's their children or their meaning, like you and Patty, your children were your meaning for the first 20 years of their lives.
And then what happens is the kids grow up and the marriage falls apart and the life falls apart. That things that are external to us,
Yeah.
you're giving away too much power, I think, if we're too much tethered to all of that.
Yes.
Now, I don't want to sound indifferent toward children and other human beings,
No,
but for me,
you're right.
Frankel, of course, we're just winding down this segment here, and it's hard to really go into any depth. And Frankel needs to be here to speak in his own voice, or someone who's more expert in him.
He
But
believed that suffering made that happen for him.
yes, it did.
Because he could find, and that attitude, he also said, and you and I have talked about, attitude's more important than aptitude.
Yeah.
And Frankel did say, now if you have both, it's really good. But he said attitude, you can choose your own attitude in any circumstance.
True. When he was in abysmal circumstances, and he didn't let his circumstance determine his way of thinking. He said if he did, they win.
That's right.
And that's how he provided a bulwark against it. It's a very true. And by the way, it's not even unique to him. Different people articulate it in different ways, and they come to it from different paths. I mean, the Stoics, if you go back to Greek philosophy, Marcus Aurelius, who was one of Rome's greatest emperor, similarly articulated how, reality is a lot less of what's happening around us, but the way we respond to it internally, thus our attitudes, if you will.
It even says that in our big book, that it's how we react in life.
And I know that different people say it differently, but our attitude reflects our altitude.
Yeah.
And as I close, on an airplane, whether it's a big airplane, a big, transatlantic airplane, or a small one, there's a control panel. It's a backup panel where if there's an electric blowout and everything blows, there's another panel that kicks in. And there's a few instruments that are on a backup panel. You just have to have. One is called an attitude, interestingly.
Wow. And it's in an airplane.
It's in an airplane. We had a storm here just yesterday, in fact.
Right.
And the electricity went out, but we have a generator. Thump, it kicked it. So if the electric panel blows on the airplane and all the instruments go out, there's a backup panel that fires up on an automatic system with a few instruments. One is called an attitude. An attitude is where the nose is pointed of the airplane. You're up there in the clouds, you get lost. And the reason why it's important for the pilot to know where the nose is pointed is because wherever the nose is pointed, that's where the plane's going. And it's interesting, it's called attitude as well, that our attitude determines our altitude more than anything else, more than our circumstances. And
wow.
The Bible articulates that as faith. Faith buoys people up. There's a kind of optimism that wouldn't otherwise be there, that really affects the attitude. It gives us a lift in life.
Like, is that why they say faith moves mountains?
Faith moves mountains. Yes, it does.
But what about the faith without works is dead? Don't we have to take the actions?
Yeah, you have to follow up with it, at the end of the day. Hey, this has been great, Saifi.
Deciphering our world, please.
I hope we do it again and again. It's been a great meeting.
We will definitely continue our discussion, Saifi. I love you to pieces. Hope to see you and Barry soon. Tell me what you and Barry, and tell us what you all will be doing next.
Well, there's a little bit of uncertainty. I just this past week turned in uniforms, in Texas, you can be involved in a few agencies. So I was involved with 2 police departments, one in Dallas County, another Ellis County. And I resigned, so I'm not a police officer any longer. I still serve as the director of 3 police academies in the North Texas system. And I did tender a resignation there, but I was asked to stay on as the director through the end of the year while they find somebody else and they do some other reorg thing. So I'm still doing that.
Teaching, that's your heart, that teaching. But what about, didn't you just accept a position internationally?
Oh yeah, I took a position within the denomination. Well, I'm giving myself more so to ministerial vocations. That
Okay,
I'm still a Bible college and seminary professor. I teach 1 course a semester. I might do 2. I still have a congregation as a pastor, and
yes.
my wife is co-pastoring that with me.
But
I
what about the international?
I'm getting to it. That there's what's called the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations,
Yes.
and the delegates, 92% of them voted me to be the new executive director. So I'm excited about that. So plus I have a new commentary on a New Testament book that just came out, and one of the largest producers in the English language of Bible and religious stuff, Zondervan Publishing, is releasing a Bible shortly where, you know, you get a study Bible where scholars weigh in, and I was asked to do 3 books of the Old Testament. So I'm still trying to contribute as a theologian, as a pastoral theologian.
Send your sister a signed book and not one that just says Jeffrey Seif.
Okay.
Can it say, love your baby brother, Jeffrey? We will continue deciphering the world.
Do it.
I love you.
Love you too, sweetie.
Thanks so much. And everybody, thank you for tuning in. Hope you enjoyed. Many more to come. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.